You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
3CR is radical radio, and that means more than just alternative current affairs and political coverage.
We're radical because we're an independent media outlet, owned and operated by the community.
We're radical because we give communities the control of their own shows, with their own music, in their own languages.
We're radical because we provide a media platform for communities to build their own power to create social change.
Become a subscriber and support Radical Radio. Call us on 03 9419 8377 or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.
Sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. This program is coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. Yes, I'm back in the studio live. We're streaming live on 3cr.org.au. Well, an interesting year ahead of us. Well, every year is interesting, isn't it? That would be pretty boring if it was boring, wouldn't it? Every year is interesting and things change. What I find fascinating about 2025, or the beginning of 2025, is how we're learning to live with the unacceptable. You know? I'll repeat that again. Learning to live with the unacceptable. Now, there are behaviours which are unacceptable, and killing women and children is deemed to be unacceptable unless you're a Palestinian living in Gaza. And the fascinating thing is not the fact of the brutality and the carnage that's occurring, which we've spoken about since late 2023, but the fact is how the world has come to accept that bombing an area half the size of Melbourne, half the size of Sydney, back to the Stone Age, irrespective of the civilian destruction, is totally unacceptable. And how the people involved have become heroes in the eyes of certain sections of the world. When you see world leaders embracing a war criminal, the Prime Minister of Israel, and you see world leaders thumbing their noses at the international arrest warrant which has been issued by the International Court of Justice, you begin to understand that it seems to be a human trait that we learn to live with the unacceptable. As we see the garbage rise to the surface in the United States of America, we seem to have learnt to live with what is a totally unacceptable situation in terms of the way people conduct themselves. If I conducted myself in the same manner as the forthcoming president of the US of A, I'd be in big trouble. But it seems that if you're powerful, or if you're supported by powerful elements in society, that all we can do is look on and learn to live with the unacceptable. Well, the fact is, I don't accept the unacceptable, and I'm sure most listeners to this program don't accept the unacceptable, and that's the key. The key is we do not have to accept this garbage. Irrespective of the garbage that's peddled on social media and the legacy media about how vital it is to the world to continue these unacceptable practices, it's obvious that we do not have to accept this. We don't have to learn to live with the unacceptable. It's our task to highlight what was unacceptable yesterday is unacceptable today and will be unacceptable tomorrow. And mass murder by a nation state has never been acceptable as a relevant part, as an important part of human history. So think about it. How many things are we expected to accept? How many things are we expected to acquiesce to? How many things will you be asked in 2025 to support? You'll be asked to support the increasingly hatred-driven agenda pursued by the Dutton-led Liberal National Party in an attempt to gain power in this country, believing they can ride on the coattails of the garbage that's rising to the surface in the United States of America. We've seen the legacy media, controlled by Murdoch and the fruits of his loins, or loins, I should say, continuing blatant lying. It's not misinformation, it's not disinformation. It's twisting reality to suit their political agenda. And what's their political agenda? It's based on us accepting the unacceptable, accepting that power will continue to be concentrated in the hands of a shrinking minority, and accepting that the only way forward is to allow billionaires to ride roughshod over sovereign nation states. And we're asked to accept that sovereign nation states are nothing more than some type of institution which is there to ensure that no one and nothing, as far as the legislative agenda is concerned, gets in the way of them making increasing profits at our expense. And we're expected to accept or learn to accept that the problem isn't the fact that power and wealth is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, but that the problem is the outsider, the migrant, the person with a different sexual orientation. That's who we now believe is the problem, and will make Australia and America and the rest of the world great again by grabbing on to this sickening, death-loving ideology which is based on the creation of profits irrespective of the human, social and environmental costs. Although you and I may not accept the unacceptable, there will be many people in our society during 2025 who believe at the root of their problems, the fact they don't share in the commonwealth, the fact that they're outsiders, they're marginalised and nobody listens to them, is not due to the concentration of power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands, but due to the other in our society. And as long as that ideology continues to be the major ideology where self-interest takes precedence over collective effort to improve the situation we find ourselves in, not just as citizens of this country, but citizens of the world, because you may find this hard to believe, but borders are nothing more than creations by human beings, and nature doesn't accept these so-called borders created by sovereign nation states. So 2025 is going to be a battle of minds. It's a battle to ensure that the unacceptable does not become part of everyday life. And if you look at history, the periods of the greatest damage to societies and human beings is not the damage caused by terrorists, but the damage caused by states, sovereign nation states, who become rogue, who think they can get away with anything in their desire to protect their borders and somehow expand their reach outside their borders. So think about it. Will you accept the unacceptable? Or will you be part of that group, irrespective of how small it is, that says enough is enough? We won't accept the unacceptable. There are standards that we as human beings need to follow. And irrespective of whether the garbage rises to the surface because people believe that the situation they find themselves in is due to the other in their midst, not the fact that power and wealth is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, we will continue to ensure that we resist the acceptance of the unacceptable. You know, it's fascinating, isn't it? 14 people are killed in Louisiana. 14. The world stops, the Western world stops. They put hands to their hearts. We have an outpouring of grief, which is understandable, because these were totally unnecessary deaths. Deaths due to some crazed ideas, by some individual who's been, believes that by killing a few people, somehow the world is going to change for the better. While another 100 Palestinians die yesterday, another 30 tomorrow, another 50 the day after, 45,000, over 45,000 now, 70% women and children, and we just shrug our shoulders and learn to live with the unacceptable. And that's the dilemma. When we see war criminals feted as heroes, when we see world leaders embrace war criminals, and more importantly, pour in armaments to war criminals because somehow they believe that these criminals protect their interests in that part of the world, then we begin to understand the enormity of the situation we find ourselves in 2025, where fact and fiction, it's very hard to tell them apart. But there's only one thing I'd like to remind you about. Nature doesn't care. Irrespective of the yarns we spin, irrespective of what we say to justify the unacceptable, irrespective of what the garbage which is floated to the surface, says, the fact is that nature doesn't care. And that's the reality we face in 2025. We continue to soil our planet. We continue to go on this death march, and that's all it is, an international death march. Nature will respond. And it responds to the situation, irrespective of ideology, irrespective of religion. It responds in the way it is designed to respond. Listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. If you want to leave messages, you can leave them at 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489. Now, an Australian icon died, and his death hardly raised eyebrows. The cartoonist and social critic and satirist Michael Leunig died at the age of 79. Now, Michael Leunig was well known to a generation. That's right. Lost to a generation. He was known to a generation, not as a hard-edged ideologue, but as a man who began his career as a cartoonist in the old National Review, or Nation Review. And for generations, decades, the cartoons that were produced in the Age, before it was gobbled up by Channel 9, had a profound impact on people, not in terms of, as I said, ideology, but in terms of the vagaries of everyday existence, the sorrow, the pain, the joy, the happiness of everyday existence. And I think one of his most enduring cartoons was a father and a son crouched over a television set, watching the sun rise on the TV, while through the window in their room the sun was rising in the sky. Extraordinary insight into the society we're becoming. Extraordinary insight into the society we're becoming. Extraordinary. So, I'm not sure what the funeral arrangements were for Michael Leunig, but I'd be surprised if he's offered a state funeral. And the tragedy is that about 6 months ago he was booted off the Age as a cartoonist because He was no longer believed to be relevant in a society that has huge issues differentiating between fact and fiction. So, Vale Michael Leunig, you will be remembered by many people in our society for the little bit of joy you're able to bring to people on a daily basis, and maybe the pathos, exposing the pathos of everyday existence and those who believe they were born to rule. You're listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Now, just in case you didn't know, there's a federal election around the corner. That's right. There is a federal election around the corner, possibly May, because obviously the Labor government is waiting for interest rates to fall before it'll call the next federal election, although it has to be held by May 2025. And already the campaigning has started. Well, it started years ago. And that's the thing about elections. The campaigns start as soon as a government is elected into power. And if a mildest reformist government like the Albanese-led Labor government is elected into power, the demolition of their agenda begins on day one by the legacy media and social media. That demolition is constant. And the ability to fight back is curtailed. Because we are in a situation every day of our lives where the cultural, social, political, economic agenda is not about satisfying human need. It's about satisfying the ability of a shrinking minority to dominate us in every aspect of our existence, whether we're aware of it or not. The fact is, the corporate world and the billionaires which sit on top of that corporate world are having an increasing effect on us every day of our lives, whether we are aware of it or not. For example, we're told there's no other alternative. The only alternative is self-interest. Collective effort is a waste of time. It's all about protecting your patch, not working together to overcome common problems, but using self-interest to divide us, to think that the enemy is the person wearing that funny hat, or whose colour of their skin doesn't match the colour of our skin. Forgetting ultimately that power and wealth in this country is being concentrated in fewer and fewer and fewer hands over the last half a century. Sovereign nation states have become playthings of the corporate sector. And we have the ridiculous situation now where even in so-called representative democracies we have representatives of the billionaire classes in charge of a political framework that is manipulated to suit their ends. The rhetoric may seem inclusive in terms of a segment of the population, but it's not inclusive in terms of the whole population. And that's what we'll see in this federal election. Hatred. Hatred, hatred, hatred. The weapon of choice when you're trying to generate fear and insecurity and present yourself as that strong leader that is required to make Australia great again. So, as I said, don't accept the unacceptable. Don't accept the hate mongers. You may feel overwhelmed, but we don't need to feel overwhelmed. What we have to say is just as legitimate, if not more legitimate, than those who have no solutions but division and hatred. But the dilemma is, while an increasing number of people are becoming cynical with the situation they find themselves in, that cynicism is the very aphrodisiac that is required by the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication to continue to allow them to rule uninterrupted. You listen to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia. So let's not forget, it's not about self-interest. It's about collective effort. The difference between us and the other animals in the animal kingdom is very, very simple. We survived, we prospered as a species. We inhabited every corner of this planet for one very good reason, because we worked collectively. We understood that self-interest is the way to oblivion. In 2025, we have forgotten that essential lesson, that it's collective action which ensures the survival and the prosperity of a people, not a divided nation. So what you will see in the world as strong leaders emerge, in inverted commas, as they emerge, cutting their way through a forest of destruction as they emerge, the fact is they have nothing to offer us except more barbarism, more pain, more suffering, more inequality. And that's what people think. If people think that a billionaire sex offender and fraudster, the President of the United States, the new President of the United States, can somehow ameliorate the powerless position they find themselves in, well, then they will reap the benefits. Now, I hate to use biblical analogies, but remember the old biblical analogies? You throw your seeds on barren ground and they don't grow. You can throw as many seeds as you like on barren ground and they don't grow. You throw your seeds on good soil, it grows. And the problem is that we're creating societies which are barren ground, barren as far as economic ideas are concerned, barren as far as political options are concerned, barren as far as morality is concerned, barren, totally barren societies that are driven by a desire to create ever-increasing profits, irrespective of the human, social and environmental costs, by producing more and more and more and more consumer goods which are of no benefit to the majority of people. All right, I don't want to depress you, but again, we do face difficult times. The thing about facing difficult times is the fact that it is the time when you need to strike back. It's the time when you need to organise. It's the time when you don't put your hands in your head and say, oh, woe is me, nothing will ever change. Things change. And they change because people like you and me want them to change. As I keep saying, hope is the love child of desire and expectation. The desire that change will occur and the expectation that change will occur. Without that desire and expectation, there is no change. And individuals can provide a catalyst to create movements which push governments and powerful people to make change. Because if they don't make those changes, they'll be swept out of the path of that movement. And that's the history of revolution, the history of rebellion, the history of reform. It's about ideas initially, and then people taking up those ideas and demanding those ideas be implemented. For example, I'll give you an example. 99.9% of people today would believe that having a universal basic income for every citizen, every resident in this country, is ludicrous. The fact is that things are changing so rapidly in terms of technology, artificial intelligence. The fact is that we are not going to need every human being to be involved in the productive process in order for this country or any country to survive and prosper. So what do? Did you pauperise significant sections of your population? You set up armed enclaves of people with power and wealth to enjoy that power and wealth? Or do you look at a collective solution? Not a solution based on self-interest, but a collective solution based on ensuring that everybody has access to the basic necessities of life. And that's what a universal basic income is about. This may be an idea which today seems outrageous, but the fact is that pressures, whether they're economic or technological, pressures will force us as a society to look at this as a viable, important way to survive. Let's move on. See, what I like about 2025 is how propaganda is about making the ridiculous seem reasonable. All right? Now, Mr. Mark Zuckerberg, head of, one of those social medias, Meta or whatever it is, made a statement. He said, all this fact-checking bullshit that we've been forced to adhere to, well, let's get rid of it, all right? Let's get rid of it. Because it's in your best interest that we get rid of it, It's in your best interest that we allow the hate mongers to fill up social media and present their ideas free of challenge. Oh, yeah, we'll have a bit of community feedback, but guess who decide which community feedback gets on board? Obviously, it's the algorithms. All right? So here we have a situation of the ridiculous being made to seem reasonable. It's a little bit like, the Prime Minister or the opposition leader gets up and says, we need to reduce taxes, which they've done, for the more wealthy people in our community, because this will help the economy. And the benefits will trickle down to the rest of the population. Now, reasonable or ridiculous? Obviously it's ridiculous. So what they're trying to do is make the ridiculous seem reasonable. We've had 50 years of this bullshit. We've had 50 years of, neoliberalism. I don't want to use fancy words, but we've had, 50 years of corporatisation and globalisation and privatisation and deregulation and of sovereign nation states keeping out of the way of business. And what have we got for it? increase in inequality, increased hatred, increased divisions, the accumulation of wealth and power in fewer and fewer hands, the destruction of institutions which were created to ensure that everybody had access to society's wealth. Now, it's ridiculous to think that a tax cut to the most wealthy citizens will somehow benefit everybody in society. But it sounds reasonable, doesn't it? It sounds reasonable. Here's another ridiculous thing. There is no other alternative. There is no other alternative. What do you mean there's no other alternative? There's always alternatives. There's always alternatives. Oh, there is no other alternative than corporate capitalism. We need corporate capitalism in order to prosper, to survive. And we look all around us, and as we see the logical endpoint of a capitalist system, a system based on private investment for private profit, the logical endpoint is globalisation and corporatisation. And what that means is less competition, higher prices, more unreasonable demands by the corporate sector, inability to fight back. And we're told it's made to sound reasonable, that that's the only alternative. Ludicrous. Ludicrous. Other thing I find ridiculous, but it's reasonable, is everybody says, oh, that problem is too complex for us to solve overnight. Oh, that problem is too complicated for us to actually address. You know, we may be able to address it another century, but it's just too complicated. Everything is too complex and complicated. Did you hear that? Complex and complicated. When people hear the word complex and complicated, their eyes glaze over and they think, well, if it's too complex and complicated, well, there's no point in me thinking about it because there's nothing I can do, is there? It's too complex and complicated. Well, it's simple. There is nothing that is complex and complicated. What is complex and complicated are the lies and the distortions, the misinformation, the disinformation, which is part and parcel of everyday life, which makes things complex and complicated. Now, everybody tells me the climate emergency is not everybody, but most people, is a complex, complicated thing, and, you know, it's hard to address. Well, it's very simple. You know it, I know it. Fossil fuels create the climate emergency. You cannot solve the climate emergency by continuing to bankroll fossil fuel production. And in this country, we spent $11 billion last year giving a handout to the fossil fuel industry, okay? Now, if we want to address climate change, we have to deal with fossil fuel. Simple. It's not complex. What may be complex is the way we are going to do this in terms of the resistance by the fossil fuel industries and their supporters around the globe, including the garbage that's risen to the surface in the US of A. You know, that is difficult. It's not complex, it's difficult because of all the hurdles which are put in your way. But the whole point about the climate emergency is it is a simple concept. It's simple. Now, I've given you this example before, but I'll do it again because it's a simple example. And what people need to understand is that complex ideas can be put to bed through simple examples, okay? I'm feeling really good. I've got some spare cash and I buy this large glass dome. And in this large glass dome, I put Adam and Eve. But it won't be Adam and Eve, it'll be two little miceys, all right? Two mice. And in the Garden of Eden, there's all this wonderful stuff, okay? Now, Adam and Eve do what Adam and Eve do. They bonk, okay? They procreate. And there are more and more and more and more. Now let's remember, Adam and Eve, our little mice, live under a glass dome, and their progeny, generation after generation, live under that glass dome. And they have finite resources under that glass dome, including the oxygen they breathe. And as they reproduce and increase in number, they begin to have issues. And eventually they start eating each other. So there's nothing complex about climate emergency. We live in a globe. We don't have enough spaceships to pollute Mars or the Moon and set up colonies over there, although Mr. Musk would like to do that. So we need to deal with the situation we find ourselves in. But because there are these entrenched interests that have made their fortunes through developing and expanding these industries, we now find ourselves in a situation where sovereign nation states are incapable, although they're willing, but they're incapable of passing legislation to remove this issue. Because it's a planet-wide problem. It's not something that one sovereign nation state can resolve. So, isn't that ridiculous? So we make the ridiculous seem reasonable, all right? Make it, so that's another thing watch out for in 2025. You know, making the ridiculous seem reasonable, and remember, nothing is too complex or complicated. I'm not talking about, you know, being a nuclear physicist or a quantum mechanic professor. We're talking about simple things that have profound impacts on us as human beings. For example, Treacle, Treacle, trickle-down economics. Think about it, okay? For the last 50 years, we have been told that if we continue on the neoliberal pathway, and I'll make it simple because there's nothing complex about the neoliberal pathway. It's a simple thing. It's about a minority acquiring power and wealth. And the way they do it is you do it through deregulation. What's happened over the centuries is that ordinary people have forced governments to pass legislation to protect them, right? To protect their interests. Deregulation is about removing these regulations which were put in place to protect people's interests, to allow those who exploit people's labour to continue to exploit people's labour, free of the problem of having governments regulate their behaviour. Then you have privatisation. At the beginning of the 20th century, people demanded change. They demanded the state no longer solely represent the interests of that small section of society which dominated them through land ownership. Right? They demanded change. They demanded society create institutions to give them access to the basic necessities of life. Things like a government-owned energy system, government-owned water, social security benefits, a universal healthcare system. Then privatisation comes in. Privatisation is about giving away public institutions which have been created through the blood, sweat and tears of generations of people to the private sector for peanuts, for a song. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. You know? That's what it's about. Every day. That's what it's about. So today, in 2025, we have a minuscule amount of resources which are owned by the government of the day. Not the people, because you'd have to incorporate the ownership in the Australian Constitution, but government of the day. It's all been given away to the private sector. And month after month, we have Royal Commission after Royal Commission telling us how evil it all is, whether it's the aged care sector, whether it's the financial sector. And I've spoken about this ad nauseum over the last 48 years, because this is the 48th year of the program. All right? Spoken about it ad nauseum. But we've been led to believe that everything that is done by the public sector is bad and everything that's done by the private sector is good. And we've, swallowed the bait, holus bolus. Then you've got corporatisation. I mean, that is the end point of a deregulated capitalist system. Little fish are eaten by bigger fish, who are eaten by bigger fish, who are eaten by sharks. And that's what we see. So 50 years after this grand experiment, and that's all it is, an experiment, we now see the economy dominated by a small number of corporations. Walk into any mega metropolis, to buy your shit, and you'll see the same names over and over and over again. And what social media has done is allowed these privately owned cartels to grow and grow without the need to have infrastructure. So what we see is a new kid on the block. And that's what corporatisation is about. It's about allowing corporations to become so big, they become too big to failure, and they dictate the legislative agenda. And then you have globalisation. Now, you all know about globalisation. You go into your local supermarket or wherever, you buy a can of beans and you notice they've come from South Africa, as if we can't make beans grow beans in this country. You buy a bottle of sauce, it's from Italy. You can even buy bread from Italy. The list goes on and on. What's the point? What's the point? But that's what globalisation is about. It's about allowing corporations to exploit the world, not just the people that they employ. And we're supposed to be grateful that we can buy a can of beans from South Africa or Spain or Italy, which is 50 cents cheaper than something grown in this country. Think about it. How ridiculous. What a ridiculous situation. But the thing is, the ridiculous seems reasonable. You go, wow, I've saved 40 cents. And you don't think of the ramifications. The greenhouse footprint to bring that shit over here. The effect it has on local production. Extraordinary. But the fact is, the ridiculous is now reasonable. Everything is too complex and too complicated for us to unravel. That's what we're told. We need to be quiet, nice consumers. So you've got an option. You do have options. We always have options. Options may not be as easy, but you do have an option. You don't have to buy from Amazon. You don't have to buy from the mega metropolises. You don't have to be part of this system if you don't want to be. It's difficult. You don't have to use Uber. You don't have to. You don't have to line up at a bloody supermarket and serve yourself. You do have everyday options, but we take the easy way out. You don't have to use your phone to pay for your $4.50 or $5.50 coffee. You can still use cash. Because people are, you do have options. You don't have to go on Google every day. You don't have to respond to every bloody, advertisement that's in your message bank. You don't have to believe all the shit that pours out of social media. You don't have to accept the unacceptable. You don't have to do any of that. And it won't cost you much. But it will give you a sense that you have some control over your destiny. And that's the key thing to remember in 2025. Irrespective of the garbage that rises to the surface and tries to pollute our everyday existence, the fact is that we do have options. They may be small. We do have options of coming together. We do have options of laughing at them. We do have options of not accepting the unacceptable. We do have options of not thinking the ridiculous is reasonable. But it does take a bit of time and a bit of thinking. But you do have options. But if you're spending all your time on social media, if you're spending all your time, taking all this stuff in and paying, your way forward, well then maybe you don't have options. But you can make options. And that's the thing about life. You don't have to follow their path. You don't have to, march to their drumbeat. You don't have to tell everybody. You can tell everybody the emperor has no clothes. That what is happening is totally ridiculous. Forget about it being immoral and unethical. Nobody cares about morality or ethics in 2025. Only losers do, people like you and me. But the fact is, you do have options. And if you think you don't have options, well, then you may as well buy your casket or get your prepaid funeral paid for before that ultimate end. Look, you've been listening to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. If you're wondering what anarchy is all about, it's not about chaos. Anarchos means without rulers. What gives rulers the ability to organise the lives of billions of people or ruin the lives of billions of people? Inequalities in power and wealth. The anarchist struggle is the struggle to devolve or share power, possibly through direct democratic means, and the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. Simple goals, nothing complex about it. There is nothing complex about life. We need to breathe air to live. We need a little bit of human interaction. We need a little bit of love, a little bit of tension, a little bit of adrenaline. There's nothing complex about it whatsoever. We have made it complex because we have allowed other people to determine our fate and our future by giving them a free hand to do whatever they like to promote their self-interests before the collective interests of us all. You've been listening to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast courtesy of the Community Radio Network from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. My name is Joseph Toscano. You can send emails to info@pipsy.net. You can join Public Interest Before Corporate Interest. Just go to their website. YouTube channels, Public Interest Before Corporate Interest, josephtoscano.nam. Don't forget the 20th of January for Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener Day here in Melbourne. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. Listen in to The Anarchist World This Week, next week. As I said before, this is the 48th year of The Anarchist World This Week, and if we're lucky, we'll get to 50 years. If we're unlucky, it doesn't really matter, does it? Once again, you can also send me letters. I know, it's unbelievable in 2025. Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. Go to the Facebook pages, Joseph Toscano, and there's a lot of stuff there that we're inviting you to. Come along, make the effort. Maybe you'll meet somebody who'll change your life. You never know. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World This Week on your local community radio station. Listen in, next week, courtesy of, as I said before, the Community Radio Network. That number again, 0439 395 489. 0439 395 489. I do answer nice calls. I ignore nasty calls. And I don't answer the phone, so leave a message. 0439 395 489. Thank you for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. Wow, the sacred cows have come back in. They said, Joe, get off the bloody airwaves. I've been on them for too long. You're in love with your own voice. Come and join us and dance and sing in the sunshine, because it's wonderful to be alive. It's great to be back in 2025, and hopefully we'll grow old together in a pleasant sort of way. Listen in next week to The Anarchist World This Week.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to The Anarchist World This Week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Are you a 3CR subscriber?
We really need our listeners to subscribe to the station. It helps us remain financially independent and is an important part of our community governance.
It's just $40 concession, $80 waged, $150 for a band or organisation, and $300 solidarity.
Become a 3CR subscriber today.
3CR Radical Radio.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.